pristine white lace of her wedding dress was snagged on sagebrush, tearing a jagged line through the silk. Each ragged breath she took was a prayer, each pounding footstep an act of rebellion. They would call her a runaway bride, a hysterical woman who fled the most powerful man in the territory. But Josephine Holloway knew the truth. She wasn't running away from a wedding. She was running toward a chance to live. Out in the vast, unforgiving wilderness, with a posse hunting her like an animal, she was about to collide with a destiny she never could have imagined, a destiny forged in the heart of a Lakota warrior who would change her world forever. The church bells of Redemption Gulch pealed with a joyous clamor that felt like a death knell to Josephine Holloway. From her vantage point in the small vestry, she could see the pews filling with the town's most influential citizens. They weren't here to celebrate a union of love. They were here to witness a transaction. She, the daughter of a destitute merchant, was the price being paid to settle her father's crippling debts to the wealthiest man in the territory, Mr. Bartholomew Thorne. Bartholomew was a man carved from the harsh landscape itself, all sharp angles and cold, hard surfaces. His eyes, the color of a winter sky, had assessed her not as a woman, but as a mare he was adding to his stock. He had spoken of the sons she would give him with the same detached possessiveness he used when discussing his cattle herds. The expensive silk of her wedding gown felt like a shroud, and the delicate veil her mother had tearfully placed over her face felt like a cage. Her father, a man broken by misfortune, and whiskey had gripped her arm that morning, his knuckles white. "You will do this. Josephine," he'd hissed, his breath sour. "You will smile, and you will become Mrs. Thorne, and you will save this family." But as the organ music began its solemn march, Josephine looked at her reflection in the wavy glass of the window. She saw not a bride, but a ghost, a hollowed-out version of herself, her spirit already withering. She couldn't do it. Saving her family could not mean the damnation of her own soul. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through her resignation. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a wild bird beating against its cage. In one fluid, desperate motion, she turned from the window. The door to the back alley stood ajar, a sliver of dusty sunlight cutting through the gloom. It was an invitation, an escape. She didn't think. She simply moved. Lifting the heavy skirts of her gown, she slipped out the door, the sudden brightness of the afternoon sun blinding her for a moment. The joyous sounds of the church faded behind her, replaced by the clatter of her own frantic footsteps on the hard-packed earth. She ran past the stables, the scent of hay and manure filling her lungs, a welcome reprieve from the cloying perfume of the church flowers. She didn't know where she was going. The town of Redemption Gulch was an island in a vast sea of prairie and unforgiving badlands. But any direction was better than the one that led her to the altar and into the arms of Bartholomew Thorne. She ran until her lungs burned, and the elegant, impractical shoes she wore were scuffed and broken. The town dissolved behind her, and soon she was alone, a stark white figure against the dusty brown and green of the plains. Hours passed. The sun beat down relentlessly, and the pristine dress became a sweat-soaked, dirt-stained mess. The delicate veil caught on a thorny bush and ripped away a ghostly banner left fluttering in the wind. Thirst was a fire in her throat, and exhaustion was a leaden weight in her limbs. The vast, empty landscape that had promised freedom now mocked her with its indifference. She stumbled, her ankle twisting painfully. A cry of pain and frustration escaped her lips. She was lost, utterly and completely lost. As dusk began to bleed purple and orange across the horizon, she collapsed onto the parched earth, the last of her strength gone. The world began to spin, the edges of her vision darkening. Her last coherent thought was of Bartholomew's cold eyes. He would not be scorned. He would hunt her, and he would find her. Then the darkness claimed her completely. Back in Redemption, Gulch, the scene was one of contained chaos. Bartholomew Thorne stood at the altar, his face a mask of thunderous fury. When the bride failed to appear, her father had gone to the vestry, only to find it empty. The news spread like wildfire. A runaway bride. The humiliation was a physical blow to Bartholomew. He who owned half the territory, who commanded respect through fear and fortune, had been abandoned at the altar by a slip of a girl. Find her. He snarled to his foreman, a grizzled man named Jebediah. Form a posse. I don't care where she's gone. I want her back. She is my property. The men gathered quickly, their loyalty bought and paid for. They saw it as a grand adventure, a chance to earn their master's favor. They saddled their horses, checked their rifles, and rode out of town, their shadows stretching long in the fading light. They were not rescuers. They were hunters, and their quarry was a desperate girl in a ruined wedding dress. Chayton moved through the tall grass with a silence born of a lifetime spent reading the land. Every rustle of the wind, every distant call of a hawk was a word in a language he knew better than any other. His Lakota name was Sunka, but many knew him as Chayton the Falcon for the sharpness of his eyes and the swiftness of his movements. He was on a solitary patrol, his duty to watch the ever-advancing line of the white settlers, to note their movements, and report back to his people. It was the scent that reached him first, the unnatural, cloying smell of perfume carried on the wind, a stark violation of the clean, earthy aroma of the prairie. His hand went instinctively to the bow slung across his back, his muscles tensing. He followed the scent, cautiously moving from the cover of one rocky outcrop to another, his moccasined feet making no sound. Then he saw her, a splash of white against the ochre-colored dirt, so out of place it seemed like a vision. He crept closer, his eyes narrowing. It was a woman dressed in the strangest, most impractical garment he had ever seen. It was torn and filthy, but he could tell it had once been elaborate. She was lying motionless, her face turned to the side, her pale hair fanned out in the dust like spun gold. His first instinct was suspicion. The white people were a source of broken treaties and stolen land. Their women were often as treacherous as their men. This could be a trap, a lure set by soldiers or trackers. He watched her for a long time, his gaze sweeping the surrounding area for any sign of ambush. But there was nothing. The silence was absolute, broken only by the chirping of crickets and the whisper of the wind. He approached her, his steps still light and wary. Up close, he could see the signs of her ordeal. Her lips were cracked and swollen, her skin flushed with fever beneath a layer of grime. A nasty gash ran along her forearm, and her feet, visible through the tatters of her flimsy shoes, were blistered and bloody. She was not a threat. She was on the verge of death. He knelt beside her, his sharp gaze taking in every detail. She was young, younger than he had first thought. Even in her wretched state, there was a delicacy to her features, a stubborn set to her jaw that hinted at a spirit not yet broken. He gently brushed a stray lock of hair from her face. Her skin was hot to the touch. His people's law was clear. You did not leave a person to die in the wilderness, not even an enemy if you had the power to help them. To do so would be to invite dishonor upon yourself and bad medicine upon your spirit. But helping this white woman was a risk. Bringing her to his people's camp could lead her pursuers right to them. His mind warred with his conscience. He saw the tracks around her, her own stumbling, erratic footprints and nothing else. she was alone. Then far to the east, he saw a faint, rising plume of dust. Riders. Many of them. They were searching. The sight of them settled the matter. To leave her here would be to abandon her to the men who were hunting her, and he could see from the desperation of her flight that she had not left them by choice. There was a story of cruelty here, written in the torn dress and the bloody feet. With a sigh that was part resignation, part resolve, he made his decision. He carefully gathered her into his arms. She was surprisingly light, a fragile weight against his chest. She moaned softly, her eyelids fluttering, but she did not wake. Chayton stood adjusting her weight and looked back once more at the distant dust cloud. He knew this act of mercy could bring violence to his doorstep. Turning his back on the riders, he began the long, steady trek toward the hidden valley where his people made their camp. He moved with an easy, ground-eating stride, his knowledge of the terrain allowing him to choose paths that would be invisible to the white men. He was taking a great risk bringing a stranger, a Washichu woman, into the heart of his community. But as he looked down at the unconscious woman in his arms, he felt a strange sense of certainty. This was the path he was meant to walk. Josephine woke to the smell of wood smoke and roasting meat. The sensations were so foreign, so disconnected from the terror of her flight, that for a moment she believed she was dreaming. Her body ached with a profound, bone-deep weariness, but the raging thirst was gone. A soft fur was draped over her, warm and comforting. She slowly opened her eyes. She wasn't in the harsh, sun-baked wilderness anymore. She was inside a structure of some kind, the light soft and diffused, filtering through a hide-covered cone. The air was filled with unfamiliar but not unpleasant scents, herbs, leather, and smoke. She was lying on a woven mat, her head resting on a soft leather pillow. Fear, sharp and immediate, jolted through her. Where was she, who had brought her here? She tried to sit up, but a wave of dizziness sent her falling back. "Easy, child. You rest." The voice was female, low and soothing. Josephine turned her head and saw an older woman sitting nearby, grinding herbs in a stone bowl. The woman's face was a beautiful map of wrinkles, her dark eyes kind and intelligent. Her long grey hair was tied in 2 neat braids. She wore a simple leather dress adorned with intricate beadwork. Josephine stared speechless. She had never seen a Native American person this close before. In Redemption, Gulch, they were spoken of as savages, a threat to be feared and driven away. But there was nothing savage in the gentle way this woman looked at her. The woman offered her a wooden cup. Josephine hesitated for a moment before her thirst won out. She drank deeply. It was water cool and clean with a faint, minty taste. It was the most wonderful thing she had ever tasted. "Thank you," Josephine whispered, her voice a raw croak. The woman nodded, a small smile touching her lips. "I am Winona. You are safe here." Her English was slow and accented, but clear. Over the next few days, Josephine drifted in and out of a feverish sleep. Winona was a constant, gentle presence. She cleaned and dressed Josephine's wounds with herbal salves that soothed the pain. She spoon-fed her warm, savory broth that slowly brought back her strength. Josephine learned that she had been brought to a Lakota camp, rescued from the prairie, by a warrior named Chayton. When she was finally strong enough to walk, Winona helped her outside the teepee. The sight that greeted her stole her breath. The camp was nestled in a hidden valley, a vibrant community teeming with life. Teepees were arranged in a large circle. Children laughed and played, and women worked together, tanning hides and preparing food. It was a world away from the rigid, judgmental society of Redemption Gulch. Here there was a sense of purpose, of community, of a deep connection to the earth beneath their feet. She saw him then. Chaitan. He was standing with a group of other men, a bow in his hand, his back straight and proud. He was tall and powerfully built, his dark hair falling loose over his shoulders. When he turned and his eyes met hers, her heart gave a strange little jump. His gaze was intense, unreadable, but she felt no menace from him. She saw only a quiet strength, the same strength that had carried her across the prairie to this place of safety. He walked over to her. Up close, he was even more imposing. "You are better," he said. It was not a question, but a statement. His voice was a deep baritone. "Yes. Thanks to you," she managed to say, feeling shy and overwhelmed. "You saved my life." He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. "The men who hunt you are still looking. They are led by a man named Thorn." Josephine flinched at the name. "He will not stop," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "He believes I belong to him." Chaitan's dark eyes studied her face. "And do you—" "No," she answered, the word coming out with more force than she expected. "Never." A flicker of something, respect perhaps, passed through his eyes. He seemed to look past the torn dress and the grime, seeing the core of her defiance. In that moment, a silent understanding passed between them. He had not just rescued a helpless woman. He had found a fellow survivor, a spirit who, like his own people, refused to be broken or owned. As the days turned into a week, Josephine began to find a rhythm in the camp. Winona gave her a simple doe-skin tunic to replace the ruined wedding dress. It was soft and comfortable, and wearing it felt like shedding an old, painful skin. She helped the women with their chores, learning to scrape hides, grind corn, and mend clothing. It was hard work, but it was honest. And for the first time in her life, she felt useful, a part of something real. She watched Chaitan from afar, her fascination growing. She saw him train the young boys, teaching them to shoot arrows with impossible accuracy. She saw him listen with deep respect to the tribe's elders. She saw the gentle way he spoke to his mother, Winona. He was a warrior, fierce and protective, but he was also a son, a teacher, a vital part of his community. And often she would look up to find his eyes on her, his falcon's gaze watchful and intense. A slow, tentative bond was forming between them, woven from shared glances and unspoken questions, a fragile bridge between two vastly different worlds. Bartholomew Thorn was not a patient man. A week had passed since his public humiliation, and his fury had not cooled. It had hardened into a cold, obsessive rage. Every day his posse returned empty-handed was another insult, another piece of his formidable pride chipped away. "Nothing, sir." Jebediah reported, his hat in his hands, as he stood before Thorn in the opulent parlor of his ranch house. "It's like the earth swallowed her whole. We found her tracks and a piece of her veil, but then they just vanish." "The earth does not swallow people, Jebediah," Thorn snarled, slamming his fist on his polished oak desk. "She was found. Someone took her. The savages." The theory had been growing in his mind, festering like a wound. No white man would dare cross him by sheltering his bride. It had to be the Lakota. He saw them as vermin, a nuisance to be cleared from the land he intended to claim. This incident provided him with the perfect excuse. "We ain't got no proof of that, Mr. Thorn," Jebediah cautioned. "Proof?" Thorn laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "I don't need proof. I need my property returned, and I need to teach those heathens a lesson. My lesson." He decided a different approach was needed. The brute force of his ranch hands was not enough. He needed a specialist. He sent a rider to the next town, over to a saloon where the dregs of the frontier gathered. The rider returned 2 days later with Silas Croft. Croft was a man who seemed to have been born without a soul. His eyes were pale and colourless, and a jagged scar ran through one eyebrow, giving him a perpetual sneer. He was a former army scout who had been dishonourably discharged for his extreme brutality. Now he worked as a tracker and bounty hunter, renowned for his ruthlessness and his uncanny ability to find anyone who didn't want to be found. "They say you lost something, Thorn," Croft said, leaning back in his chair and propping his filthy boots on Thorn's desk. Thorn's eye twitched at the disrespect, but he held his temper. He needed this man. "My fiancée," he said through gritted teeth, "taken by the Lakota." "Lakota are smart," Croft mused, picking his teeth with the tip of his knife. "They know how to disappear. Finding their main camp will be tough and bloody. I am not concerned with the cost in dollars or in blood," Thorn replied coldly. "I want the girl back, and I want their camp wiped from the face of this earth. Consider it pest control." A slow, cruel smile spread across Croft's face. "Now that sounds like my kind of work. I'll need a dozen of your best men, not the clumsy farm hands you've been using. Men who can ride hard and shoot straight. And I'll need you to double my usual fee." "Done," Thorn said without hesitation. Croft and his new posse set out the next morning. They were a different breed from the first group. These were hard, violent men, their faces etched with the cruelty of their lives. Under Croft's expert guidance, they moved with a grim purpose. He picked up the trail where the others had lost it, noticing subtle signs they had missed a single displaced stone, a bent blade of grass. He found the place where Josephine had collapsed, and he found a second set of tracks, moccasins, faint, expertly placed, but there. "Got 'em!" he grunted to the men. One of them carried her off, heading northwest into the canyons. Their hunt became brutal. They rode with a reckless disregard for the land, their horses churning the delicate prairie soil. They showed no mercy. They stumbled upon a small, isolated native family, an old man and his grandson, who were fishing by a stream. "Where is the main camp?" Croft demanded his men surrounding the two. The old man, his face a mask of dignified defiance, said nothing. Croft just smiled his cold smile. He didn't ask again. The posse rode on an hour later, leaving behind a scene of silent devastation that spoke volumes of their character. They weren't just looking for Josephine. They were on a campaign of terror. The smoke from the small burning homestead was a signal to anyone who dared to defy them, a promise of the violence they intended to bring to Chayton's people. Wordlessly, the wilderness carried the news of their approach, a wave of fear rippling ahead of them toward the hidden valley. The news of the massacre at the stream reached the Lakota camp like a cold wind. A young hunter, returning from a solo expedition, had stumbled upon the scene and rode back with a speed born of horror and grief. He told his story to the tribal council, his voice shaking with rage. The description of the lead tracker, a man with a scarred eyebrow, left no doubt in Chayton's mind. They were Thorn's men, and they were getting closer. The atmosphere in the camp changed instantly. The cheerful sounds of daily life were replaced by a tense, somber quiet. The men began checking their weapons, their faces grim. The women gathered the children, their eyes wide with fear. This was the violence Chayton had worried he might bring upon them. He found Josephine near the creek that ran through the valley where she was helping Winona gather medicinal herbs. Her face was pale, her hands trembling as she listened to the whispers passing through the camp. "It's my fault," she said, her voice barely audible when Chayton approached. "They're here because of me." "They were coming eventually," Chayton said, his voice low and steady, though his heart was heavy. "Men like Thorn always come. You are just the excuse they have been waiting for." He looked at her, truly looked at her. In the past weeks, he had seen her spirit bloom. She had shed the fear and fragility of the woman he'd found on the prairie. She was strong, resilient, and had a kindness that had earned her the affection of his mother and the other women. The thought of Thorne's men putting their filthy hands on her, dragging her back to a life of misery, filled him with a cold, protective fury. "You must decide," he said, his voice firm. "I can try to get you away from here, lead you south toward the settlements in the next territory. But you must go now before they find this valley, or you can stay. If you stay, we will fight for you." Josephine looked up at him, her blue eyes searching his face. "Go." The thought of leaving, of returning to the world of men like Thorne, was suffocating. This valley, these people, they had shown her a life she never knew was possible, a life of dignity, of community. Here she was not property. She was a person. And this man, Chayton, who stood before her with such solemn gravity, was the heart of that life. "If I go, they will still attack your people, won't they?" she asked softly. "To punish them for helping me." He could not lie to her. He gave a slow nod. "Yes." "Then I will not run," she said, her resolve hardening her voice. "I have spent my whole life running, or being told what to do. I will not be the cause of any more death. I will stay. I will face them with you." Her courage struck him to the core. This was not the frightened girl from the vestry. This was a woman making a stand. In that moment, his path became clear. The risk, the danger, the consequences, none of it mattered as much as protecting her, as honoring her choice. He knew what he had to do. It was a drastic binding act. But it was the only way to make her untouchable, to formally declare her as one of their own under the absolute protection of a Lakota warrior and his family. It was a claim that his people would be honor-bound to defend. He reached out and took her hand. His touch was warm and firm, sending a jolt through her. "Josephine," he said, speaking her name for the first time. The sound of it on his lips was different, imbued with a weight she had never heard before. He looked directly into her eyes, his gaze so intense it felt as if he were seeing into her very soul. "If you stay," he said, his voice resonating with an ancient power, "you stay as my wife." It was not a question. It was not a romantic proposal whispered in the moonlight. It was a declaration, a vow made in the face of imminent death. It was a shield he was raising over her, a circle of protection drawn in the dirt. He was binding her fate to his and his to hers in the most profound way he knew. In his world, this was the ultimate act of commitment, an unspoken promise of protection unto death. Chayton's words, "You stay as my wife," did not echo in the valley. They landed with the silent seismic force of a mountain shifting. For Josephine, the world tilted on its axis. The word wife, which had so recently been a symbol of her condemnation, a cage of silk and lace, was now being offered as a shield. It was a brand not of ownership, but of belonging. A declaration of war made in 2 syllables. Her heart, which had been a frantic bird in her chest, seemed to stop altogether. She stared into his dark, unblinking eyes, searching for any hint of doubt or coercion. She found none. What she saw was a profound and terrifying certainty, a warrior who had weighed the consequences, the blood of his people, the potential destruction of his home, and chosen this path regardless. He was not merely offering her a title. He was offering her his name, his family's honor, and the unwavering protection of his entire tribe. The weight of such a gift, such a sacrifice, was immense. She could not form words. The air was too thick to breathe, too heavy with the unspoken promises and imminent threats. so she simply nodded a single sharp affirmation that felt more binding than any vow she could have spoken in a church. It was an acceptance of not only his protection, but of the shared fate that came with it. Her life was no longer solely her own. A silent understanding passed between them, and then he released her hand. Without a word, he turned and began walking toward the center of the camp, toward the great council fire, where the elders were already gathering. He did not look back, but she knew she was meant to follow. Every step she took behind him felt like a step into a new life. The eyes of the entire village were on her, 100 pairs of dark, assessing gazes. She could feel their questions, their fear, their resentment. She was the outsider, the white woman, the source of the coming storm. She lifted her chin, forced her shoulders back, and met their stares. She would not show them the fear that was churning in her stomach. She owed Chaitan and his people at least that much courage. They stopped before the council of elders. His father, Chief Matto, sat at the head, his face a mask of stern gravity, carved from a lifetime of leadership. The flickering firelight cast deep shadows across his weathered features, making him look like an ancient stone icon. The other elders flanked him, their expressions equally grim. "My son," Matto's voice was a low rumble, the sound of rocks grinding together. It carried the weight of generations. "The wind carries whispers of your words. You claim this woman as your wife." "I do," Chaitan said, his voice ringing with a conviction that defied the tension in the air. He stood tall and unyielding before his father and the council. "I claim her." An old warrior, named Thashunke, whose face was a roadmap of past battles, stood up, his movements stiff with age and anger. "You claim a Washichu." He spat the word, his voice raspy with contempt. "Have you forgotten the broken treaties, the stolen lands, the sickness her people bring? She is the bait in their trap, and you have led us right to it. She is a danger to us all. Her people betrayed her long before they betrayed us." Chaitan countered, his gaze sweeping over the council. "I found her near death, fleeing a man who sees her as nothing more than livestock. She has worked alongside our women. She has shown respect for our ways. When I offered her a chance to flee to safety, she refused. She chose to stay to face the danger with us, rather than bring it upon us and save herself. Her spirit is not that of a traitor. Her heart is honorable." It was then that Winona, who had been standing silently at the edge of the circle, stepped into the light. She moved to stand beside Josephine, a silent, powerful statement of solidarity. She placed a hand on Josephine's arm, her touch both grounding and protective. "I have listened to the girl's heart." Winona said, her voice clear and strong, cutting through the murmuring dissent. "I have watched her. I saw her hands, soft and useless from her old life, become calloused as she learned to scrape hides. I have seen her kindness with our children, who follow her like shadows. I have heard her cry in her sleep, not for herself, but from the memories of the cruelty she fled." She turned her sharp, intelligent gaze upon Thashunke. "You speak of the danger she brings, and your fear is wise. But we cannot let the poison of our enemies corrupt our own laws. Our way is to offer sanctuary to the hunted. Our honor demands we protect the defenseless. My son has not forgotten who he is. He is acting as a true Lakota. He has chosen, and I, his mother, will honor his choice. She is now a daughter of my lodge." Winona's words, spoken with the unassailable authority of a chief's wife and a respected elder, settled over the council like a heavy blanket smothering the flames of dissent. The logic was undeniable. To cast Josephine out now would be an act of dishonor, a betrayal of their deepest values. Chief Matto remained silent for a long moment, his eyes closed as if in prayer. When he opened them, they were fixed on Josephine. His gaze was so piercing, it felt as if he were stripping away every pretense, leaving her soul bare to the firelight. "This is not a game, little one," he said, his voice softer now, but no less intense. "His word and our honor binds us to you. If you are his wife, you are a daughter of this tribe. You will share our food, our warmth, our sorrows, and our battles. Our fate is now your fate. There is no turning back from this path. Do you understand what is being asked of you, and what is being given?" Josephine felt the weight of every person in the valley on her shoulders. She looked at Chayton, who stood unwavering, his faith in her absolute. She looked at Winona, who offered a strength she could borrow. She looked at the fire at the circle of worried faces who were being asked to risk death for a stranger. "I understand," she said, her voice trembling only slightly. She found a strength she didn't know she possessed. "I know that I am not worthy of the price you may have to pay. But I accept, and I swear that I will be a daughter to this tribe, not a burden. I will honor your protection with my life. I am honored to stand with you." A long, heavy silence followed. Then Chief Matto gave a slow, solemn nod. "How? It is done." The words were a release. The tension in the air did not vanish, but it transformed. The debate was over. The purpose was now unified. The camp began to move with a quiet, deadly efficiency. Warriors appeared from the shadows, their faces painted for battle, their movements fluid and purposeful. They were no longer just preparing to defend their homes. They were preparing to defend their chief's new daughter. As dusk bled into the sky, Winona led Josephine into her family's tipi. Laid out on a clean hide was a garment of the softest doe skin. It was a simple, elegant dress, adorned with intricate quill work in patterns of blue and yellow, representing the sky and the earth. It was a wedding dress. There was no ceremony, no joyous celebration. The impending battle was their ceremony. Survival would be their blessing. As Winona helped her change, the soft leather felt like a second skin, an armor of belonging. Later, as a sliver of moon hung in the dark sky, Josephine stood with Chayton at the edge of the camp, watching the sentries move like ghosts among the trees. The world was hushed, holding its breath. "Are you afraid?" he asked, his voice a low murmur, a private sound in the vast quiet. "I'm terrified," she admitted, the confession a relief. "But I'm not afraid of the fighting, or even of dying. I'm afraid of what men like Bartholomew Thorne do to things they believe they own. I'm afraid of that cage he calls a life." She looked at him, at his strong profile, silhouetted against the night. "You've given me something to fight for. I never had that before." He turned to face her, and for the first time, she saw the fierce warrior's mask fall away, revealing something softer and more vulnerable beneath. "And you have reminded me of what we are fighting for," he said. "It is not just for land. It is for our way of life, for family, for the freedom to choose who we protect." He gently reached out and tucked a stray piece of her hair behind her ear. His fingers brushed against her skin, and a warmth spread through her that had nothing to do with the night air. It was a promise, an acknowledgement of the invisible, unbreakable bond that now connected them. His vow was her shield, and in the heart of that terrifying night, she knew with absolute certainty that she would rather die at dawn as Josephine, wife of Chayton, than live another 100 years as the property of anyone else. The dawn broke, not with a blaze of glory, but with a quiet, insidious seep of grey light. A cold mist, born from the night's chill, clung to the valley floor, coiling around the bases of the pines, and muffling the world in a profound silence. It was a deceptive peace. Hidden within that silence, concealed by the rocks and the trees that lined the narrow canyon entrance, the Lakota warriors waited. They were not men anymore, but extensions of the land itself, part of the shadows kin to the unmoving stones. Each warrior controlled his breathing, his heart beating a slow, deliberate rhythm in time with the ancient pulse of the earth. They were a single, unified entity, an immune system ready to expel a disease. In a small clearing just inside the valley's mouth, Chayton stood with his father. He was acutely aware of everything, the cool weight of the bow in his hand, the scent of damp earth and pine, the distant nervous whinny of a horse from deeper within the camp. He felt Josephine's presence behind him, though she was hundreds of yards away. She was a warmth at his back, a focal point for the grim determination that had settled in his soul. He had made a vow, and the time had come to honor it with blood if necessary. The first sound was unnatural, an affront to the valley's sanctity. It was the faint, rhythmic clatter of iron horseshoes on stone, a metallic percussion that did not belong. The sound grew steadily louder, joined by the creak of saddle leather and the low, coarse muttering of men. It was the sound of invasion. They appeared out of the mist like spectres from a foul dream. Silas Croft was in the lead, his horse picking its way, with a predator's confidence, his dead eyes sweeping the canyon walls, searching for the ambush he knew must be there. Beside him, radiating an almost visible aura of venomous rage, rode Bartholomew Thorne. He sat astride a magnificent black stallion, his posture ramrod straight, his expensive suit and polished boots a monument to his arrogance. He looked as if he had come not for a fight, but to foreclose on a property, his face a mask of smug certainty. The dozen men who followed were a collection of hard, brutal faces, their eyes glinting with a cruel anticipation. They reined in their horses at the sight of Chayton and Chief Matto, who stood waiting for them, unmoving and seemingly unimpressed. Thorne's lip curled in a sneer of utter contempt. "Well, well," he called out, his voice echoing unnaturally in the enclosed space. "The Chief Savage and his pup, I must commend you on your taste in stolen goods. Now my patience has worn thin. I have come for my property. Hand over the girl immediately, and I will consider letting you live out your miserable lives on whatever scrap of land the government decides to grant you." Chief Matto did not rise to the bait. He stood with a quiet dignity that was in itself an act of defiance. His voice when he spoke was calm and steady, yet it carried an authority that Thorne's shouting lacked. "The woman you speak of is not property. She is a person, and she is under the protection of this nation. She does not wish to go with you. Your business here is finished. Leave this place." Thorne let out a short, ugly bark of a laugh. "My business is finished when I say it is. A hysterical female who fled from the honor of my name doesn't know what she wishes. She is my betrothed sworn to me. You have poisoned her mind with your heathen nonsense. I am her rightful guardian, her future husband. You have stolen from me, and you will pay the price." As if summoned by his possessive tirade, Josephine appeared. It was a deliberate, calculated act. She walked from the cover of the trees, her back straight, her head held high. Winona was a step behind her, a silent, formidable shadow. The sight of Josephine struck Thorne like a physical blow. It wasn't just that she was here, it was how she looked. Dressed not in the tattered remnants of her wedding gown, but in the elegant beaded doeskin of a Lakota woman, her fair hair braided and adorned with a single feather. To Thorne's mind, she was utterly defiled, a beautiful portrait smeared with mud. The transformation was the ultimate act of rebellion, a visual declaration that she had chosen their world over his. Josephine! He roared, his voice cracking with a fresh wave of fury. He swung himself down from his horse, his boots crunching on the gravel as if he were grinding the very earth under his heel. What is this mockery? Take off those ridiculous rags and get over here now. This absurd little adventure is over. Josephine flinched at the violence in his tone, but she stood her ground. Her gaze, however, didn't go to Thorn. It went to Chayton, and in her eyes he saw not a plea for rescue, but a silent, unwavering affirmation of the choice she had made. It was all the strength he needed. He moved then, a fluid, deliberate motion that placed him slightly in front of her. He was a living wall, a shield of flesh and bone between her past and her future. He looked directly at Bartholomew Thorn, his eyes burning with a cold, controlled fire that promised a terrible reckoning. He let Thorn's hateful words hang in the air for a moment before he answered his voice, devoid of heat, yet carrying the deadly chill of honed steel. "She will not be going with you," Chayton stated, his tone flat and absolute. "You call her your future wife. You call her a runaway bride. You speak of ownership and what is rightfully yours." He paused, letting the silence stretch, forcing every man, friend and foe, to lean in to his next words. He locked his gaze with Thorn's, a warrior, challenging a tyrant on the field of honor. "You are mistaken," he said, his voice clear and resonant. "She is not a bride. She is my wife." The declaration struck the clearing with the force of a lightning bolt. It was an impossible, incomprehensible statement to Thorn. It was the ultimate refutation of his power, his status, his entire world. The idea that this savage, this creature he considered less than human, would dare to claim what was his, and that Josephine would accept it, was a wound so deep it drove him instantly insane. "Wife!" The word was a strangled hiss spat from between clenched teeth. His face, already flushed with anger, contorted into a mask of pure, murderous hatred, the veins standing out on his temples. "You filthy animal!" he screamed, his voice a ragged tear in the fabric of the morning. "You will die for that!" His civilized veneer shattered completely. With a guttural roar of pure, wounded pride, his hand flew to the pearl-handled revolver at his hip. There was no more negotiation, no more pretense. This was about annihilation. But in his blind rage, his target was not the warrior who had so mortally insulted him. It was the woman who had been the source of it all. He aimed the pistol directly at Josephine's heart, his eyes crazed with the need to destroy what he could never own. But Chayton was the falcon. He moved with a speed that seemed to defy the laws of nature. He had seen the madness ignite in Thorn's eyes, had anticipated the final desperate act of a cornered tyrant. In the split second it took for Thorn's finger to tighten on the trigger, Chayton spun, shoving Josephine behind him with all his strength. The crack of the pistol was a singular, violent thunderclap that ripped through the valley's peace. The bullet meant for her found him instead. It tore through the thick muscle of his left shoulder, the impact a fiery, staggering blow. A sharp cry of pain escaped his lips, but he did not fall. He braced himself, his feet planted firmly on the ground, his body a defiant shield. The pistol shot was the signal. It was the first shot of a war. Before its echo had even begun to fade, it was answered by a sound that froze the blood in the veins of Thorn's men, the chilling, unified war cry of 100 Lakota warriors rising as one from the rocks and trees. It was the sound of the earth itself, roaring in fury. And an instant later, the air was filled with the deadly hiss of a swarm of arrows, a dark rain that descended upon the stunned and terrified posse. The battle for the valley had begun. In the end, it wasn't just a battle. It was a reckoning. The Lakota warriors, fighting with the ferocity of men defending their homes and their honor, overwhelmed Thorn's arrogant posse. Bartholomew Thorne, a man who believed his wealth could conquer all, died in the dirt of a land he could never own, brought down by the very people he despised. Josephine, no longer a victim, found her own strength tending to the wounded, including the man who now called her wife. His declaration, spoken in defiance, was sealed in the blood and bravery of that day. Theirs was a love story, not written in sonnets, but carved into the harsh, beautiful landscape of the West, a testament to the idea that a true home is not a place you are given, but a place you are willing to fight for. And a true marriage is not a contract of ownership, but a vow to stand together, even when the first shot is fired. Thank you for listening to this story of courage, love, and rebellion. If you were moved by Josephine and Chaitan's journey, please show your support by hitting that like button. Share this story with someone who loves epic tales of the Old West, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories that bring history and heart to life. Your support means the world and helps us continue creating content for you. Click that bell icon so you never miss an update.